Hi there, this is Allison Jonjek, the Cranberry Outreach Specialist, and Amaya Atucha, the plant physiologist with the Department of Horticulture. And we are talking today as people are kind of wrapping up with harvest. After we had maybe a little lower yields than people had expected, some of which we're attributing to a dramatic snow event that happened last fall, we are again going into a pretty precipitous drop in temperature just after harvest. I want to share my forecast with you real quick here. And I'll give Amaya the opportunity to talk about some of our drops, especially going into Friday. This is October the 20th, 2020 that we're recording this. But Amaya, if you wanted to talk, and I can look at some of the other regions as well.
Yeah, I was just, quickly looking at the weather forecast, and it looks like that from Thursday to Friday, in the majority of the cranberry growing sectors divided here in the Great Lakes Weather Service that they have, they show that the minimum temperature is going to be a drop around 20 Fahrenheit degrees from Thursday to Friday. So you can see there from 34 to 14, what is forecasted as the minimum, and very similar on the other areas. And so that is quite a significant drop. I would say that in general, we've talked so many times about this and the unknowns of what's happening. And it's true. There's so many things that we don't know about and so many questions. But there's a couple of things that we do know pretty well. And one of them is how cranberries and plants in general enter dormancy and how they gained hardiness of their tissues. And so some of the cues for that, and we've talked about this before many times, is the length of the day, the photoperiod. As the days get shorter, the plants, they are able to sense that and measure that, and they know that colder temperatures are going to start and that they have to get ready to enter dormancy. So that happens actually pretty early on. It happens somewhere in August. So that point on, that's when we see also that, the cessation of growth. We don't see any more growth. And that from that point on, what happens is the lowering the temperature is what is making those tissues more and more cold hardy. When there is a gradual decrease in temperature, the plant starts gradually gaining cold hardiness. Now, we usually said that we need a frost event, so the temperature needs to drop below 32 Fahrenheit, the freezing point, to really kind of trigger a substantial increase in hardiness, which has already been the case. We have had temperatures that had dropped below 32, the freezing point. So that cue, the plants have already perceived it, and that makes, that really pushed them into becoming much more cold hardy. We did quite a bit of research looking at cold hardiness in cranberries and trying to understand what were the plants doing, what was the mechanism. And so one of the things that we discovered, and this was a lot of the work that my student Camilo Villota did, is that we pinpoint that around mid-October, there's another of those episodes in which the plant has a huge increase in hardiness. And we don't really know exactly what is that happen this time of the year. It could be, again, changes in photoperiod, or it could be that really this is when we start getting more frequent minimum temperatures at night that drop below 32, which is kind of activating that process of gaining hardiness. And so that happens around mid-October. And we did this work with high-red mostly, but we also did it with Stevens. And in the 3 years that we collected data, we would see no damage at all when temperatures were around 10 Fahrenheit, even 5 Fahrenheit, we would see a little bit of damage. So I know that the temperatures are going to be in the high teens. The question is, well, what do we do? Are they hardy enough or not? And the truth is that it's so much dependent on what happened the days before.
So I guess I have a couple of questions. You've talked about vines are impacted in where they're going to be in dormancy based on photoperiod And then based on how many freezing events they've been through so far, I feel like I've heard or seen about, and maybe it's that we perceive it and it's not actually the case, but I think I've heard it perceived anyway, that after a bed has been harvested, after it's bounced back from the reduction in hardiness that it has from being underwater for an extended period, that they tend to go dormant faster. So if I had two beds of the same variety, and one bed I had harvested and the other I hadn't harvested yet, when I'm about to have a cold event, that my already harvested bed will have turned purple, will have turned more purple than the one I haven't harvested. Do you have anything to say about that? Whether it's an observation that is valid or one that maybe we think we see but we don't really know?
Sure. So I want to clarify that there's two different processes. One thing is that the vines are dormant, and another thing is that they're cold hardy. So when we talk about something being dormant, it's referred to that the meristem that produces the new leaves stops growing. It's not growing anymore.
Okay.
And the reason why, and there's many reasons why there's a cessation on that growth. So, and if that meristem for some reason, is dormant and it's not producing new leaves, new shoots, it's not continuing to grow. Okay. One reason could be because there's other parts of the plant that are inhibiting the growth. That happens with when we have apical dominance, for example. If we break the tip, the laterals will grow. That's one type of dormancy. Another type of dormancy, that's the one that we talk here, is a dormancy in that there's something that accumulates in that meristem that doesn't allow it to break from that dormancy and start growing. And those are usually growth substances that are suppressing the growth. Okay. And when that happens, the only way to break it and start it growing again is to have a period of exposure to these chilling hours. So that is the process that is affecting, the start of the growth again in the spring. Okay. Now, on top of that, there's cold hardiness, and cold hardiness refers to the ability of the tissue to withstand freezing temperatures. Okay. And so you could talk about cold hardiness in the middle of the growing season. It's the ability to withstand cold temperatures. Okay. So the plants are dormant. If you go before harvest and you take an upright and you put it in the right conditions to grow, it's not going to grow because there's so many of the substance that is inhibiting the growth that it's not going to happen until it's exposed to cold temperature. Now, when you talk about cold hardiness, that's a different thing. That is a continuum process that happens during winter. Okay. So are they more or less cold hardy before or after you harvest? Or is the harvest really affecting them to get more cold hardiness? Because in all of those periods, they're still dormant. Well, the research that was done on that by Jiwan Palta and Beth Workmaster, they have a little publication there, and the results are kind of inconclusive. They tested for 2 years, and they tested the hardiness before the flooding and the hardiness after the flooding. Okay. And in 1 year, they actually did see that the buds were less hardy after they had flooded and they had harvest. But the following year, when they repeated it, they saw no difference.
Interesting. I'm going to have to reread that paper.
So when people say, yes, harvest is, make them less hardy than they were before we flooded, well, that's not so. I mean, it could be, but it could not be because the research is inconclusive. Gotcha. So I would say that, harvest, the flooding could reduce hardiness of the vines in 2 ways. One is that if the water is warm and you're exposing them to a warm environment, mm-hmm. that would be one way. And the other one is that if you have them underwater for an extended period of time and you're stressing the plant, but anything that you do that stresses them is going to decrease their ability to gain hardiness. Okay. So that would be the 2 ways that we could lose hardiness. But I would say that if it's a short harvest and the water is cold and the temperatures have been, cold, when I say cold, the temperatures have been cool enough, like you are around the freezing point, I don't think that there should be a significant loss in hardiness whatsoever.
Okay. For this particular harvest, though, and you can still see some of my sunburn left, we had pretty warm temperatures for a lot of harvests, so that wouldn't have been so much the case, but maybe that factors into why the research was inconclusive. I had one question from a little bit back. And so when I talk about vines turning purple, colloquially, that is a cold hardiness measure. That's not a dormancy measure. Is that right?
Well, we don't know. And the reason why the plants turn that color purple, it's because it's cold enough for photosynthesis not to happen at a high rate. Okay. And so what happens is that the pigment, the chlorophyll that gives the green color, when there's a lot of sun and light and UV, but there's no photosynthesis happening, that light keeps being absorbed and is affecting the photosynthetic system, so the different photosynthesis. So okay. They develop the anthocyanins, that red color, to reflect, to protect from that light that is impacting them, but they're not using them because it's too cold to do photosynthesis. So it's a measure of protection of the leaves.
Cool.
And
okay.
We associated it with cold hardiness because we know that that's at the same time is when, you know, they're gaining hardiness. But I don't think that it's necessarily hand by hand related to cold hardiness. So we cannot use the development of, we could use it as a proxy, but you know, we've never been able to establish a really good correlation. We tried to do this in my lab, and we never found a correlation between the level of anthocyanins, so the color of the leaves, and the cold hardiness of the buds. We didn't find a correlation, because it would be great, because that's the thing, is like we don't see any changes in the plants, so how do we know what's happening? And so we always thought, oh, maybe we can use anthocyanins to do this, and when we try it, you know, we didn't find any correlation.
Wow. Okay, so I had not been very aware of that. Is there also?
Well, this is some, you know, preliminary research that we did, and we didn't continue because of that. But I mean, that would be something interesting to look in the future. Can we still, you know, can we dig more? Can we continue to investigate to see if there's a correlation, or we can use this as a proxy to see how cold hardy those buds are?
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. So in all those cases too, all the chlorophyll and the other tissues that are fragile are still in the leaf. You know, they're not like harvesting nutrients and hiding them in the roots or anything. Those are still there. They're just being protected from UV radiation by the anthocyanins.
Yeah, there's a lot of reserves that are translocated, but the chlorophyll is still there. It's just that underneath that layer of, you know, anthocyanins that is protecting you from the UV light. Because when you get a lot of that light, let's say in December, and it's like 0 Fahrenheit, there's no photosynthesis happening there. So it's like, you know, getting hit by that UV and that light all the time, and a way to protect that photosynthetic system is to use this. It's kind of like a sunblock, or like, you know, sunscreen. That's what it is.
So in terms of, you know, what are signs that my vines are not ready to be unprotected during a cold snap? Can't use purpleness as a definite indicator, maybe just as a clue, but are there any signs that we can use, or just that rule of thumb that if I'm having a plunging of temperature, you know, 18 degrees Fahrenheit from one day to the next as the minimum? Anything to add there? There isn't.
We don't really have any visual cues, and that's what it makes it so difficult to say, you know, this is associated. As I said, some of the things that we've consistently seen is that around this time, mid-October, we do know that there's a rapid increase in cold hardiness by the vines, and it's usually during this time. We've seen it in the research that we've done in my lab, and then previous researchers, Beth Webmaster and Jiwan Pauta, also saw them, and a couple of other students that worked with Jiwan, you know, several years ago, they also pinpoint to this time of the year as a critical time in which there's an increase in the hardiness. But yeah, we don't have any other cues. But I think that a good rule of thumb is that, and it might be very conservative, but you know, it's better, you know, to be a little bit more conservative in this case, especially given last year, that if you're going to have a drop of about 20 degrees Fahrenheit in the minimum temperature, that's quite a bit, and I would say that I would protect. Other thing that we've noticed, and from other research on cold hardiness, is that there seems to be sort of like a memory of the plant. So what happened maybe 10 days before to the event of, you know, the cold snap is important. So
Okay.
if in the 10 days before temperatures were very warm, oh yeah, those plants are not ready to be able to survive that they're gonna get them. If the temperatures 10 days before there has been, you know, in around 32 or, you know, 25 around there, and they're going down, it means the plant is actually acclimating and it might be ready to withstand that. So important to look back at what were the minimum temperatures 5 or 7 days before and look at the trend. Were they going down or were they actually pretty warm? And now we're having this, as I said, this plunge temperature decrease.
That kind of leads into the next question I'd had. Do you see any impacts from like the order of whether we have snow followed by a cold snap versus if we have a cold snap followed by snow? Do we see differences in how the cold hardiness of the vines had developed?
I don't think that the snow really makes any difference. I mean, the fact that it's actually snowing is about the temperature experience.
Okay.
So when it snows, it's not that cold. And so
you get the little insulative effect.
Yeah. So it's not doing anything to increase the hardiness. I would think that, I mean, the most important thing is the temperature experience, whether it's with snow or without snow, it really doesn't matter.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess that is about the set of questions that I had going into this. Have you thought of anything else over the course of over the talk that we want to share with people?
No, I mean, I know it's really hard because, you know, I wish we had more answers, but as I said, I mean, this is everything we have. We don't necessarily, I want to say, the research is inconclusive about the effect of the flood, whether the flood really, you know, decreases the hardiness of those buds. We don't really know if that's necessarily the case. So I would say that the better indicator is the fact that the temperatures are going to drop 20 degrees Fahrenheit. That's okay. A pretty substantial drop in temperature.
And I would encourage anyone who wants to do an experiment, maybe comparing against their neighbors. If you know your neighbor wants to do one thing and you want to do another, both clip a few uprights before the flood and after the flood, and you can check how many, you know, how your meristem looked in the two different treatments of flooded and not flooded. So that's just one thing to try comparing with your neighbors if you're interested in doing an experiment.
You can also collect buds after this. The important thing is that you warm them up. So you collect and you collect those uprights, warm them up. You can have, if you have a really good magnifying glass, let them warm up for maybe a day in room temperature. And then what we usually do in our lab is instead of dissecting them equatorially, we do it longitudinal, so long way. And so you have exposed the base of the bud, and just looking at that area, if you see a lot of damage, if it's brown, that's a really good indicator. It's not necessarily where you have the meristems, but that area we've identified as an area that tends to show damage first, and it correlates really well with whether those buds are going to grow in the spring or not. So if you see a lot of browning in that area, it means that, yeah, there was some damage happening there.
And if you do that, please do reach out with me and share with me what the results are, as we can watch our temperatures there. I guess that's all I've got for today then. So thank you to Amaya, and thank you to you for listening.
No problem.
Thanks University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension for hosting our video.
Thank you, Allison.